In the previous video, we discussed about the things you need to do before arriving in Australia. And in today's video, we will cover the things you need to do after arriving into Australia, probably within the first 2 weeks. So if you haven't watched our previous video regarding pre-departure checklist, go ahead and watch that first maybe, and then come back to this video. And if you have watched it, let's continue with today's topic. So let's discuss about all the things you need to do as an international student after arriving into Australia. The first thing first will be the airport transfers. Of course, as soon as you land, getting out of the airport, you will need something to go to your accommodation. Ideally, you would have arranged it nice and early. You can speak to your university if they provide free airport pickups. If they don't, then you may have to take public transport or maybe a ride-sharing services. I wouldn't suggest you to do a public transport trip for the very first time from the airport. The reason being is that you might be carrying lots of stuff with you. And obviously, you are new in the city, so might be a little bit challenging to find out exactly where you live. So either take a taxi or maybe a ride-sharing service like Uber to get to your place. The second thing on our list is exchanging some currency. So if you haven't done it already, you would need to exchange some currency into Australian dollars. You can do it at your local bank, but sometimes the exchange rates can be really bad. I wouldn't even suggest you to do that at the airport, just because sometimes you really get bad rates. Just in case if you need to do something urgently, yes, you can definitely do at the airport as well. But if you really want to exchange a lot of money, then ideally you can do it when you reach in the city, and will be better if you do it during the weekdays. The next thing obviously you'll need is a SIM card. So the chances are that you will be staying in Australia for a while on your student visa, so it will be ideal for you to get an Australian phone number. You can get either prepaid or a postpaid SIM card. Prepaid means you pay it ahead of time. Postpaid means like a billing system, you have to pay each month afterwards of your usage. In the very first month of arriving, I would suggest you to take a prepaid SIM. The reason being is that you're not familiar with the systems yet, so it will be a good idea for you to pick up a prepaid SIM card. We'll leave a link of one of them in the description below if you want to get that. As soon as you get a SIM card, the next thing we'll need to do is call your family and friends back home. Obviously, your parents and your friends will be waiting anxiously for you to call back as soon as you arrive. If you can call them from the airport itself, that's great as well. But once you arrive in your accommodation, you can call from there also. These days, you can access Wi-Fi and use the apps to call your family back home. But if you really want to call them, then getting a SIM card is definitely one of the priorities you need to tick off nice and early. The next thing you would need to get is a public transport card. In order to travel around in your city, you would need a public transport card. For example, if you're arriving here in Melbourne, you would need to buy a MyKey card. In Australia, most of the transport cards can cost you anywhere from $5 to $10, depending upon the city or state you're living in. But you would definitely need this card in order to travel around your city. Next thing would be to open your bank account. Now you can apply to open your bank account from overseas as well. And if you have applied for that, great. All you need to do is go to the local branch of the bank where you have applied for this bank account and provide with your ID and stuff. So ideally, you can apply for the bank online itself, and then once you arrive, you go to the local branch and verify your details and ID and kick off your bank account over there. If you brought some Australian dollars along with you, then you can put that into your bank account as well. Because most of the time, you might not need a cash. You can use debit cards to do most of the transactions. The next thing will be to apply for your TFN or an ABN. To work in Australia, you would need a TFN, tax file number. Although sometimes you might be required to work as a contractor or subcontractor. In that case, you might need an ABN. ABN stands for Australian Business Number. So for example, if you want to work for food delivery services like Uber Eats, you would need an ABN. TFN is for those people who want to work as an employee, but it's good to have both of them. But it's definitely important to apply for TFN first, then apply for ABN afterwards. You only need to apply for ABN if you really need one. Otherwise, you don't need to apply for it. The next thing would be to open a superannuation account. Now, when you're working in Australia as an employee, you get superannuation. Superannuation is basically like a retirement fund. You don't have access to this money until you actually retire or you leave the country permanently. But it's very important because if you're working here, you usually get a percentage of your salary or wage going into this superannuation fund account. So ideally, you should open a superannuation fund account after arriving in Australia as well. The next thing to do is to prepare your resume and cover letter. Resume is also known as CV. So you need to prepare an Australian style resume in order to apply for jobs here. You will also need to customize your cover letter for each job that you're applying for here in Australia as well. If you want template for both of them, we got you sorted for that. Check the link in the description for the free templates. Now, after you have prepared your cover letter and resume, the next thing will be to apply for the jobs. So most of the times in Australia, people apply for jobs through websites. Some of the popular ones are Seek, Indeed, Adzuna. For students, we would recommend you to check Student Job Board, which is a very popular website for finding finding part-time and casual jobs for students. If you are looking for some independent contractor work, you can also check Uber Eats. You don't need to apply for Uber Eats with your resume or cover letter. You need to just fill the form on their website and get started. Next thing we suggest you to do is undertake some short courses. In certain industries in Australia, you would need to have certain short courses under your belt in order to apply for those jobs. For example, if you're going to work in hospitality, most likely your employers will ask you to do RSA course. RSA course means Responsible Service of Alcohol. So if you are going to work in any licensed premises like in cafe or in a restaurant or in a bar, then you would need to have this certificate. It's only 2-3 hours and you can even do it online these days and cost you anywhere from $30 to $50. If you want to know where to do these courses, we have article on different type of short courses you can do in Australia. So we will leave a link of that article in the description as well. The next thing to do will be to get your overseas student health cover card. After you arrive in Australia, you would need to inform your OSHC card provider that you have arrived in Australia, and they will actually issue you a overseas student health cover card as well. Most of the time you can download the app also. Good to have that card anyways. The next thing you need to do is to learn Australian English. Most of you might be pretty good with your English already, but did you know that Australian English is quite unique and different? We actually got a video on Australian slangs and a complete article on slangs as well. If you want to learn about these slangs, we would definitely leave a link in the description box below. The next thing will be to go to university and attend the orientation. Orientation, also known as O Week. It's a very popular activity among international students here in Australia, and local students enjoy it as well. It is basically an introduction week for the students who are arriving here for the first time. It gives you information about your classes, tells you about what sort of courses or subjects you might be doing this term, and everything you need to know about your college or university. Definitely attend that and also inform your college about your address here in Australia as well. It's very important that you let them know where you live in case they need to communicate with you. The next thing to do after arriving in Australia would be to explore your city. So it's a very exciting time when you come to a new country, obviously. So we suggest you that you use the public transport and go around the city, as after a while you might get busy with your studies, work, and other parts of your life. So we highly recommend you to travel around using a public transport in your city, so you get to see different parts of your city. The next thing you need to do is look for permanent accommodation. So most of the students, when they first arrive, they usually go for temporary accommodation. Could be hotel, hostel, or could be living with a friend. But after a while, you might need to move on and look for permanent accommodation. This is something you might need to do after arriving in Australia. If you already got a permanent accommodation sorted, great, no issues with that. But if you haven't got one, you might need to look around on different websites. If you're going in a sharing, you might look on Flatmates or Gumtree or even Facebook Marketplace. We actually have got a video regarding how to find a shared accommodation in Australia. Please check that out. And last but not the least will be, once you have moved into your permanent accommodation, we suggest you to buy your furniture and household items. We do not actually recommend you to buy these items in your temporary accommodation because the cost of moving can be really expensive in Australia. Ideally, once you have found your permanent accommodation, time to find those furniture and household items. You can buy used furniture and household items from places like Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree as well. Well, that's pretty much it regarding what you need to do after arriving in Australia. We try to cover every aspect that you need to do after arriving. Now in the next video, we'll discuss about what you need to do when you go to your university for the very first time. If you want to know more about that, please subscribe to the channel as we will be releasing that video very next week. Hopefully you find today's video useful. If you do, like, share and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching. See you in the next one.